Commencement Colloquy. We would like to remind our guests to please silence your communication devices. Wireless internet access can be obtained through the RPI Public Access Point. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Robert E. Palazzo, Provost of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 9th Annual President's Commencement Colloquy. The Commencement Colloquy was established by President Jackson in 2003 to provide a forum for the Rensselaer community to gather on the eve of commencement for a dialogue with our honorands. Please join me in welcoming the host for today's colloquy, the 18th President of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the Honorable Dr. Shirley Jackson.
Well, good afternoon. I didn't hear you. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is with great pride that I welcome our 2011 graduates who may be with us today, and to welcome their families, friends, and in fact all members of the Rensselaer family, the greater community, and all of our special guests. It also is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome our 2011 honorary degree candidates and their guests to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and to the 9th Annual President's Commencement Colloquy. This has become an inspiring tradition at this important time in the Rensselaer academic calendar, and we thank all of you for joining us today. Rensselaer will honor 3 outstanding leaders at our 2011 commencement ceremonies tomorrow. This colloquy today offers an invaluable opportunity for us to hear from them in a substantive way. They are leaders, thinkers, and innovators. They have shown ingenuity, compassion, and persistence. Their accomplishments in academia, in business and public service, in medicine, philanthropy and engineering, and architecture have benefited people of all walks of life, contributed to future generations, and provided examples of achievement, diligence, and goodwill for all of us. As our conversation progresses, you will learn more about each. But let me begin by welcoming architect, businessman, builder, leader, philanthropist, partner, mentor, founder and president of Dickinson-Heffner, Inc., now known as Heffner and Weber, alumnus of the Rensselaer class of 1956, honorary chairman of the Rensselaer Board of Trustees, and trustee emeritus, Mr. Samuel F. Heffner, Jr. President Emeritus of the Georgia Institute of Technology, member of the National Academy of Engineering, former member of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology under President George W. Bush, member of the National Science Board, and 12th Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. Wayne Clough. One of the world's leading experts on public health and a key player in the national debate on healthcare reform, recognized with the MacArthur Genius Fellowship and recipient of the Nelson Mandela Award for Health and Human Rights, physician, administrator, and public servant extraordinaire, America's doctor, U.S. Surgeon General and Vice Admiral Regina M. Benjamin, M.D. Through their work, our honorands have provided important examples of seizing the moment and enacting change that provides broad social benefits. We live in a time where grand change is not only possible, but inevitable. We face the possibility of renewal, of leaving the world a better place, if we can imagine, inspire, and lead. We will see opportunities such as the political awakening in North Africa and the Middle East, and this can lead to greater freedom, or it could lead to disappointment or even chaos. We see need as we experience the harshness of nature in earthquakes, in tornadoes, and other natural disasters. And we can move from rubble to renaissance, or we can merely endure. As we face increasing intersecting vulnerabilities, we find ourselves in our own Sputnik moment, with all of the incentive to transform our world. But the changes we want will not happen on their own. You know, Thomas Edison said that genius is 99% perspiration. Well, changing the world is perhaps 99.999% perspiration. And so we must begin by understanding where we are, including what options we have, what we know will work, and what resources we have. In most cases, we have a base to build on, and it only makes the job harder if we insist on starting from scratch. Next, we need to come up with a plan, one that is thoughtful and realistic. We need to be wary of unintended consequences of our actions without inventing reasons not to try. And we need to understand the people involved, or who could be involved, how they can contribute, how they are affected, and what motivates them. Finally, we must, in the end, turn our motivation into action. If we want change for the better, we need to get started. We need to invite help. We need to adapt as the situation changes. And we need to keep everyone involved active and engaged. So with this in mind, let us jump right in. Let me start with you, Secretary Clough. Wayne. Now, much of your life has been dedicated to education and research. You are a distinguished civil engineer, having received a PhD in civil engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and twice recognized with the American Society of Civil Engineering's Collingwood Prize. Now, you began your academic career as an assistant professor at Duke University, and at Stanford University, you became a full professor. But then moving to Georgia Tech, you served as professor of civil engineering, head of the Department of Civil Engineering, and dean of the College of Engineering, as well as the coordinator of their geotechnical programs. At the University of Washington, you accepted positions as provost and vice president for academic affairs, and in 1994, you began your 14-year tenure as president of the Georgia Institute of Technology, where you oversaw $1 billion in new construction, increased retention and graduation rates, achieved a higher nationwide ranking for the university, and grew the student body. In fact, your administration championed programs to encourage undergraduate research, international experiences, and to make college more affordable for low-income students. And then you did something very interesting. And I'm pleased to say I was on the board of the Smithsonian when the Smithsonian made the decision to invite Dr. Clough to become the secretary of the institution. And so as secretary of the Smithsonian, you have begun a new era for that great 164-year-old, about to be 165-year-old institution, working to expand its national and its global relevance. Now, for those of you who may not know, the Smithsonian is the world's largest museum and research complex with 19 museums, numerous research centers, 20 libraries, the National Zoo, which I went to all the time when I grew up in Washington, and research activities in more than 90 countries, each year hosting 24 million people from all walks of life and delving into areas that are essential to understanding our global challenges. And under your leadership, the Smithsonian has a new strategic plan, the first of its kind in the history of the institution, to guide it as it helps our nation shape its future through art, history, broad-based research, education, and scientific discovery, and work on the major topics of the day and linking them to our past. Now, surely in a democracy, any pathways to change must include public understanding of the issues. So against a background, Wayne, of greater complexity, accompanied by concerns about the public's scientific literacy, how have you worked to prepare people for change that inevitably will have a technological component?
Well, first of all, thank you for that kind introduction, and mentioning all those jobs would suggest, as my son said, Dad, you can't hold a job very long. But I've had the joy of being at many great institutions. And first, I think if change is going to occur, people have to want it. Fundamentally, you can't make people change. And so at each institution I've gone to, particularly Georgia Tech and then the Smithsonian, I had a very real sense that people were ready for change. Sometimes it's forced on you by changing circumstances, by financial circumstances, but they were ready to do it. But I think change has to come from a very fundamental motivation. There has to be a motivation that's very real, very substantial, that drives the reason for it. And to me, it's service to people, it's education, and today more and more helping people learn, because self-learning is becoming a big part of what we do, certainly at museums and even at universities. So I find when people are motivated, that they'll be motivated if they get the sense that our purpose is greater than just to change or just the institution. It's really in service of the world. It's really in service of the growth of people. Once you make those decisions, there are a lot of practical issues associated with change, as you know. But our plan, just to give one example, was an inclusive plan. We used about 1,600 people, not only in the Smithsonian, but outside of it, to be involved in our thinking for our future. And we used a scenario-based approach. So we looked at the possibility we'd have very positive economic circumstances and not positive. Turned out that was more the right one. But we still had a plan to work it. And people have really enjoyed it. We asked people to think about cross-disciplinary activities. They hadn't done a lot of that in the Smithsonian. They love it. It's a matter, as you know, of telling people it's okay sometimes. And so people are having a good time now. And you have good, exciting ideas, and then you get financial support for what you're doing.
Good, straightforward pathway, right? Chairman Heffner, Sam, now you launched a career in the real estate development business that has spanned nearly 50 years. As founder and president of Dickinson-Heffner, a building and land development firm, you have developed several million square feet of office and industrial space in the Baltimore area, particularly in the BWI corridor. You've served on numerous civic boards, and you are a founder and former chair of the BWI Business Partnership, devoted to fostering economic development and serving transportation needs of businesses in the Baltimore-Washington International Airport vicinity. But importantly, you've had major volunteer leadership roles as well. You served as a member of the Rensselaer Board of Trustees for 33 years, and you served as board chair for 15 years. And of course, you've seen a lot, and you have supported me as a shore partner in fulfilling the promise of the Rensselaer Plan. And your ability to change ideas into action, and I do mean action, is legend. And it is evidenced in the real estate your firm has developed. But your steadfast commitment to enormous and effective change and your extremely generous philanthropy have contributed to much of what we see all around us, certainly this great facility. Not just in buildings like this one, however, in which we sit, but in the way that the hopes and dreams of many in this audience, professors, administrators, and especially students, have benefited from your backing and encouragement. So Sam, as you've come back once again to Rensselaer in a new role, could you share with us your story on how you in your career, in fact, turned plans into action? How you dealt with resistance and disappointments, and how you worked to make dreams reality.
Well, you mentioned one point, success and disappointment. They seem to come together. And I don't think there's been any project, literally in my entire career, that didn't have a little of both. And what you learn is that that's the territory that you're dealing with. And having come from, and I say this without any reservation whatsoever, having come out of this institution as a graduate, I didn't really realize it at the time because I was too young. But now that I'm a little older, you understand the value of what this education really meant, because it gave me an ability to not be cowed by circumstance. That as challenges come to you, you face them, you analyze them, you think them through, and then you solve the problem. And I think the word is you don't give up. If what you are thinking you want to do and what you're planning to do, and this, I'm in the real estate business, so you have real estate projects. I've done a lot of them. First of all, they have to have some basis in reality that it can be done. Otherwise, you're really oaring the boat in the wrong direction. But once you've convinced yourself that this is worthy, then it's a matter of taking the talents that you have, the ability to marshal the forces, because that's what it really is in my business. I mean, subcontractors abound, and it's dealing with, a myriad of things. And you marshal those forces, and you get the job done.
Well, that sounds like a perfect introduction to you, Dr. Benjamin, Regina, because your narrative is one of exceptional courage and determination in the face of adversity. You are the founder and former CEO of the BioLabattery Rural Health Clinic in Alabama. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Benjamin perhaps a decade ago at a Renaissance weekend, and when she was right in the middle of that. Now, you were named by Time magazine as one of the nation's 50 future leaders under age 40, and you were the first physician under the age of 40 and the first African-American woman to be elected to the American Medical Association Board of Trustees. You are a member of the National Academy Institute of Medicine and a fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians. And of course, you are the 18th Surgeon General of the United States. Now, your passion for providing health care for everyone began with your clinic. I don't think the passion started there, but it was taken into action with your clinic in Alabama. And to quote President Obama at the time he nominated you, and I read the quote, "When people couldn't pay, she didn't charge them. When the clinic wasn't making money, she didn't take a salary for herself. When Hurricane George destroyed the clinic in 1998, she made house calls to all her patients while it was rebuilt." And then he went on to say that when Hurricane Katrina destroyed it again, and left most of her town homeless, she mortgaged her house and maxed out her credit cards to rebuild that clinic for a second time. And that is what he said, and that is the story. So in the course of your distinguished career, you have set an extraordinary example for healthcare professionals, an example of self-sacrifice for the greater good, becoming a role model for using advanced science and education in the service of one's community and those most in need. And now you are at the forefront of the implementation of historic healthcare reform, and you have pledged to develop programs to fight preventable illnesses. And using your experience with healthcare, could you please share with us how you come to grips with complex issues and find ways to improve the lives of others in the face of adversity and in a world of increasing financial constraints? In short, what made you do this, and how do you do it?
Well, I've always had financial constraints. We didn't have any money, so we just made it happen. One of the first things I did when you talk about financial restraints is I decided naively to go to business school to figure out how to deliver health care in an affordable way to people who didn't have money. So all of this adversity, I think, just sets a pace to say if something needs to be done, you just go do it. It doesn't matter how, it kind of gave me the stimulus to get it done. Having a community where people couldn't afford the high cost of medicines, they couldn't afford the high cost of care, just finding ways to provide that service. And I think our nation is in that position now that we have to find ways to provide good quality care. And so that's why I focus my entire priorities on prevention, because we have one of the best healthcare systems and the technology and the information available for healthcare in this country. But how do we get it to work? And one of the things we haven't addressed is the social determinants of health. And so in the Affordable Care Act, or the Health Reform Bill, there is a portion that establishes a prevention council. This National Prevention Council, composed of 17 cabinet level members, and they're all dedicated to having the government focus on prevention. And I get to chair that committee, which is historic because it provides the first time in our country that we've ever had an emphasis on prevention. So I think it's important that we as individuals, we as a nation, take our health care into our own hands. And it's not government's role to tell you what to do or how to be or how to act, but it is our role to help you. For example, one of the things we really are pushing, my first paper was a Surgeon General's vision for a healthy and fit nation about obesity, and then let's move with childhood obesity. If we want people to exercise and to eat well and to enjoy themselves, I think you have to have fun doing it, first of all. We've got to give them good places to go, safe sidewalks, safe places to exercise, good food. If you don't have a grocery store in your community, we've got to provide it for you. If we want kids to exercise, we've got to give them recess. We've got to give them physical education in class. But having the individual take control of their own health is what's so important.
Well, you know, you are the Surgeon General of the United States, but we know that healthcare is a global concern, and I hope I'm not straying too far here.
Yeah.
And you know that the United Nations has set health for children and mothers as two of its Millennium Development Goals. And while the U.S. is clearly not a developing country, could you nonetheless comment on how you think we compare globally and what we have to offer in the realm of global health? Because certainly the challenge of poverty is part of the picture, and we certainly have our pockets of poverty here. And I wonder if your experience working with people of meager incomes perhaps offers some insights for us.
Well, the way we compare is not very good. Our life expectancy compared to other development nations is much lower than most. So in this particular prevention council that we have, we're coming out with this national prevention strategy. And one of the goals for that strategy is to bring up that life expectancy, to make it longer. And so not to have Americans live longer, healthier lives at all stages of their life, but to live longer and healthier. I just came back from the World Health Organization meeting last week in Geneva, and one of the things that we're really concentrating on is something called non-communicable diseases, which is things that are not infectious, such as heart disease, stroke, hypertension, diabetes. These are becoming global concerns around the world, and so the United Nations meeting in August will have a high-level meeting focused on those. And that's the same thing I saw in BioLabattery, the same conditions, the same lifestyle changes. It's hard to make lifestyle changes. So that's why we need to make sure that we provide things that make it easier for people. But we have the same issues as around the world.
Thank you. Each of you has spoken eloquently about your experience in supporting needed change, taking on the task, sometimes in the face of various challenges, maybe even debate and resistance. And we see that at the Smithsonian. We see that in the context of volunteer leadership here, and it's certainly, I'm sure, the case in trying to promote health for the greater nation. Now, this exploration of your personal stories is important because they are both fascinating and relevant as we examine how to work effectively, again, in a world of what I call intersecting vulnerabilities, one that demands fortitude and resolve from each of us. But the question is, with all of the challenges we face, what do we do first? So let us explore a little bit what needs to be done to create a more secure, a healthier, and more prosperous society. Now, I'm going to pose this question to each one of you. And, you spoke, Wayne, of, getting people on board and hearing them out and so forth. You worked, Regina, with people of such diverse backgrounds, nationalities, beliefs, particularly when you were in BioLabattery, and I'm sure you see it playing out on the national stage. And Sam, as you've worked to move an institution, a great one, forward, you know that there's a retrenchment. And so tradition, convention, and that's true at the Smithsonian, and the status quo often are described as barriers to change. But those are the things sometimes that also define and give definition to institution or to groups of people. But the enemies of change can and sometimes do use accepted rules and principles to create obstacles. But these can provide the bases for shared values and understanding and arguments that can refine plans as well as clear and sure starting points. And in fact, beautiful poetry has been produced by creative people working within the tried and true structure of the ballad, for instance. Understanding the core mission of an organization can provide focus and credibility. Understanding the strengths and limits of culture and values can make needed change more valuable and acceptable. On the other hand, sometimes you just got to shake things up. So, Regina, improving the health of Americans does not happen in a vacuum. You face skepticism about research findings, pressure from interest groups, and of course, concerns about the role and extent of government. So how do you make these challenges jumping off points for change rather than obstacles? What do you do? Can you give us an example?
Well, I ask for help from everybody I can get it from everyone in this audience to everyone from industry, from the government, from local, state, tribal communities, whatever help we can get, because that's where it's going to start. It's going to start with that individual, again, taking control of their own life and their own health, and it's not going to be telling them what to do. It's not going to be top down. It's going to have to come from the bottom up. Martin Luther King said we shouldn't always be a thermometer that measures the temperature of society, but sometimes we have to be the thermostat So we have to turn up the heat sometime and bring it down sometime. So there are times when we have to do that. And you mentioned a couple. I met with some students a little earlier, several of which were interested in healthcare, but I was told about a case of outbreak of measles here. When we talk about vaccinations, we need to make sure we have everyone understand how important it is to get your immunizations. We can give the information, we can show you, but it's so important that you vaccinate yourself and those around you that you love, because you're not just protecting yourself, you're protecting those you're around. And so we can't do that by ourselves. We have to start making others come in and help us, making your family members and your friends show how important it is that you don't have someone die of H1N1 or the flu, and just how important it is for you to take your flu shot. Engaging each other and making us become more of a civil society, that we as citizens, we as individuals, really do have that control.
Sam, you are a businessman, and it is sometimes said that ideas are like balloons without strings, because absent constraints on time and resources, ideas may reach great heights, but they soon sail out of view. And for your whole life, you have had to work within the constraints of materials, contracts, calendars, budgets. And we live in a time where cutbacks and restraints are daily realities for business, for government, and of course, even for universities. So how do we invest in the future in such a climate?
Wisely.
Okay.
It's really a matter of making sure that what you're thinking about and where you want to go absolutely makes sense. And then you have to take a look at the resources you have available to do what you want to do. And everybody likes to dream large, because that's where the glory is. But a large dream can also be built out of small pieces. And that's really how it works. You take each piece that you can do and you do it. You don't not do it because I can't do the whole dream. You do it because I can do this piece. And pretty soon, as time goes on and the years go by, you have done the dream. These are probably the worst possible times for the development business, or the business that I've been in for 50 years. And yet we're talking about the big dream. And we're looking at each piece of that new big dream right now. So we don't give up. We constantly are analyzing, what can we do now? You don't look at, woe is me. You don't look at, well, I don't have enough money. You look at, what do I have? And then you do what you can do with what you have now.
You know, that's interesting, because when I was at the NRC, when I was in government, I used to say that I wanted to look back in any 3 to 6 month period and always know there was some step I took, something I accomplished, and that I would try to keep the big picture in mind and have it build up. Wayne, you know, Americans have a proprietary interest in the Smithsonian. I don't have to tell you that. That's because we see it as our own. It is. And so this certainly ensures that you have the attention of the public. But for any change, you're likely to evoke passionate opposition. Do you find that this tempers your actions? And if so, how? And does it sometime make for changes, nonetheless, that are better and more resilient?
Well, the American people, I try to remind audiences when I have a chance to speak to them about the Smithsonian, which is I love to do, that they own it. When we speak about having the world's largest collections, we have 137 million objects, works of art, and specimens in our collections. They're so vast, we have huge collection centers out in Maryland. Couldn't possibly keep them in our museum. And you own them. Everybody owns them. And the thing that bothers me about that equation is you don't get to see them. And so I'm driven by the fact that everyone should share in this magnificent resource. There's nothing like it in the world. Every American owns the Smithsonian, and that does, obviously, people have different views about what the Smithsonian should be, and we respect that. But it is one of those things where we have to understand our job is to help people see this magnificent place. In addition, we have a marvelous group of people who work at the Smithsonian. It is an institution that's unique in the sense that we have more volunteers than we do employees. We could not work or do our business without our volunteers, and they're all over the map in terms of the volunteers that we have. I gave a 50-year pin the other day to a volunteer. When people start volunteering at the Smithsonian, they stay. And so we have to take advantage of the love there is. And sometimes that love can manifest itself in resistance to change. And so we have to work to let people know the opportunities there. I think the interesting thing for me about making these kinds of changes is that to let people know what the opportunity is. The Smithsonian's been around for 165 years, and I like to say, when we did our strategic plan, when everyone would say, well, is it for 5 years or 10 years? I said, no, it's for 500 years. You have to start thinking about 500 years because the Smithsonian will be here 500 years from now. And we don't want to see 500 years from now the people in that generation to say, well, those people got it wrong. We want them to say we were thinking thoughtfully about the future of the Smithsonian and trying to, as you said, make that steady progress. Do our part during our time here to do it well. This is a time of enormous opportunity, and you want people to focus on that and not to think about the downsides of our time. I had the opportunity once to interview people about the future of engineering. And the funny thing was, when I talked to those students, they were tremendously optimistic about engineering because they didn't know what was coming. Then secondly, I interviewed some of the oldest people that I knew, the wisest people, and they had been through it. And they knew bad times come and they go, good times come, take advantage of the good times. It was in between. And the people who only focused on the present were the ones that got stuck in the present. And so you have to look forward and think about the opportunities that lie ahead. And this is a time, you know, the book was written recently called The Age of Wonder about that period in the late 1700s or early 1800s in England and France when science, the Age of Enlightenment, our country was created and science was basically developed. We are in another period like that. We are in another period. And so we can't let these times that tend to want to pull you down, pull us down. We have to look forward.
Please, Regina.
You mentioned about culture, and can I tell you about one of my patients? The patients in BioLaboratory, we have a diverse culture. There's 30% Asian, Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian, and about 40% white, but they're fishermen and shrimpers, and so they're a culture of their own. But there's this one patient, Miss Smith, who is an African-American woman who is about 4 feet tall.
My height.
Yes. And she called me on a Saturday, and she was obviously hurting. And she says, Dr. Benjamin, my back is hurting. I went to see that specialist you told me about, and he said I have a slipped disc and I needed to lose some weight. I've been trying, I've really been trying, but my back is really hurting. Can you call me something in stronger than this ibuprofen? And I could hear the pain in her voice, so I told her, sure, I can call you in something stronger, but you have to come and see me on Monday or Tuesday. Sure enough, on Tuesday she comes in I walk in the exam room and she's there, but she's leaning over the exam table in so much pain that she can't sit down. And I asked her, Ms. Smith, did the medicine I called you in, did it help? She says, well, Dr. Benjamin, I didn't get it. I said, what do you mean you didn't get it? She says, I couldn't afford it. And I said, but you work in the school system, you have insurance, you work in the janitorial department, you have insurance. She says, yeah, but I couldn't afford the copay. But I get paid on Friday, and I promise you I'll get it. So I stepped out of the room and I went over, told my nurse, Nell, to go and ask Jim, our pharmacist, to get the medicine for her, and she brought it back. So when I went back in the room and I said, Ms. Smith, you know, you really need to take your medicine. I can see how much pain you're in. And I handed her her medicine, and at that moment her eyes welled up with tears. And she says, oh, Dr. Benjamin, I'm just so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to have to do that. And I realized at that moment I had taken her dignity from her. And that cultural competence doesn't have to do with the color of your skin. It has to do with allowing people to keep their dignity. And so I had to figure out how to get out of that. So I told her the fact that, you know, after Hurricane Katrina and some other things, that people started sending us little small donations, and we have a pot of money for people just like her, that if she, you know, in cases just like this for us to use, and if she wanted to pay it back on Friday, she could, but she didn't have to. And so she was okay with that. And then as I was walking out of the exam room, she says, "Oh, by the way," and I said, "Yes," and she says, "Can I get a work excuse?" I said, "Sure, you can get a work excuse. Today is Tuesday. You want to go back to work on, start taking your medicine, go back to work on Thursday or Friday?" She says, "Oh, no, we have to strip those floors tonight. I've got to go back tonight." Here was a woman who can't sit down because she's in so much pain, but she's willing to strip the wax off the floors so our kids could go to school in a clean environment. And so it's for her that I wanted to be a voice and to speak for people like her. In all of this conversation, we talk about health care. She doesn't always have someone to speak for her. And the fact that last fall, when health reform went into effect, one of the things was that preventable services are not now covered, and you don't have to pay a copay. It was all worth it.
Shirley, could I?
Please.
I know Shirley shares with me the concern that higher education is perhaps becoming more difficult for people in economically disadvantaged families to access it, particularly in our great public universities. I was a fortunate person to go to a public university. Are you seeing that in healthcare, that we're seeing that the bottom part of our society, economically speaking, losing ground or not? Is our country, I want to know our country's holding together as a whole.
I think there are two parts. There are those who don't have anything. Many, if you're really destitute and poverty-stricken, you qualify for Medicaid. If you actually work and you have a job, you don't, and you're caught between. And those are the people who really are the ones that are struggling because they're working every day. They don't qualify for Medicaid. They're having to come out of their pockets. Then you have those who do work and they have their insurance, yet their insurance isn't covering what they thought it did. When they have to use it, it's not what they thought it was, or it's getting to be so expensive they can't afford to keep up with it. One of the things that I've always said, even before I got in this job, one way to improve that is by improving the education system. If people get good education, they can then get good insurance, they can get good jobs, and its cycle starts. But if there's a way to improve healthcare, improve our education system.
You know, I'm going to ask you a question about public discourse, particularly as it relates to people talking across sectors. Now, I'm sure each of you has experienced instances where people have, whether intentionally or really unintentionally, have muddied the waters of conversation. And of course, we live in a time of instant media involvement, and often the most extreme statements dominate public discourse. And sometimes people in different sectors talk at each other rather than with each other. And so the question to all of you and each of you is, how can we, as Jon Stewart famously said, take it down a notch? You know, how do we encourage respectful discussion and promote conversations that acknowledge evidence and facts and not just opinions? Who would like to jump in?
I'll just give you a start. I had a media interview with a really neat guy who is a reporter here, but he's just like every other reporter when I say I want to talk about prevention and lifestyle changes, but what particular thing? You know, that's too simple. It has to be something more complicated, like and I get this from everyone. It's like simple things you can do to change and improve your health isn't what want to be heard. They want some major outbreak of major disease. When we had the oil spill, for example, this past year, last summer, everyone wanted to know, what was the biggest disease you saw there? What was a rash? Was it a cough? What was it? It was behavioral health issues. It was depression. It was sadness, just behavioral issues. And I talk about the fact that one of my patients who told me, she says, Dr. Benjamin, I went to the kitchen to make my gumbo, and I didn't have the things to put in it. I didn't have the shrimp and the oysters, and I just sat at the kitchen table and I cried. And then there was another individual on the other side of the bay who took his boat out, his charter boat, and shot himself. Behavioral issues are just as important, but oftentimes we want to talk about the sound bites and the headliners and the unusual things when it's the simple things that really matter.
Sam, what do you think?
Well, I come from a business that's fraught with confrontation. You know, you've all seen the cartoon, you know, grab the wife and kids, the developers are coming, you know, the bulldozers are coming.
Grab the wife.
And it's a matter of getting engaged before that happens. And I'll tell you a little story. 45 years ago, we joined the local community association when we first began the major development that we did at BWI Airport. And we did that for a reason. We wanted to make sure that, because we were going to bring change, and we were bringing big change, and it was going to be controversial, but we wanted them to understand that there were benefits for the community to come out of what we were talking about. And we joined the community association, and we went to the meetings, and we explained every single thing that we were going to do. And we answered their questions, and we modified some of the things that we were going to do because they had concerns about traffic on roads and all of the things that people are concerned about, and the things that drive confrontation that if you don't engage yourself, you're going to really wind up with controversy. A month ago, the same association went to bat for us on a piece of property that I wanted to get zoned for apartments. And this is real time. There's never been an apartment building built in this association, ever. They went baloney about 10 years ago when a developer built 2 duplex houses. This is a very, very single-family-minded community. We got zoning for that property in 6 weeks. Normally, that would be a process that would take anywhere between 3 and 5 years to do. And we got it because the people that we had been part of for 45 years said, these people have never lied to us. Everything they ever told us they were going to do, they've done it. And it was a done deal.
Okay.
Well, I think we have to accept that we live in a society and an environment where opinions are very strongly held, at least at this point in time, and that you have to work to bring parties together to talk about issues that are uncomfortable. Back at my time at Georgia Tech, we had disputes between students who represented different political views. We had problematic issues that from time to time on the racial side that we needed to work on. And one of the ways we tried to do that was with the public forum. And we would have a public forum where rule 1 was when you came into it, you were going to listen to the other person respectfully. You were going to get a chance to say your piece. And you could certainly walk away and not agree with a thing you've heard, but it was going to be a respectful dialogue, at least so you'd have that discussion. We actually had a year-long process called Finding Common Ground. We had First Amendment rights speakers come in because, as you know, for example, the Supreme Court just ruled that it's all right for that group, the religious group, to stand in front of a soldier's grave ceremony and yell at them. And that is a First Amendment right. And so understanding what are First Amendment rights on university campuses, it's important. You've got to grow up. You've got to realize that a democracy means you're going to hear things that you don't want to hear. But it's part of democracy. I mean, recently we had a controversy at the Smithsonian over one of our exhibits. And so we had a forum on it. And I had the opportunity to participate. I had the opportunity for people to tell me what they thought of me and my decisions. But I had my opportunity. They had their opportunity. I thought it was a very productive dialogue because for people to understand the circumstances in which an institution like the Smithsonian works is different than what most people think. But it's useful for me to hear alternative views, to hear views that maybe are not necessarily positive views, but I need to hear them. It helps me grow as an individual, and it helps us all come together and agree at some point that we've learned from these episodes and we get better. And I think at universities it's so important for students to learn how to do that.
And I think it's very important that we become a part of the community, that the community that we live in, that we serve in, that we work in, that we are part of that. And that's what I've seen with the students here. They're really involved in the community. And wherever you go, that if you're part of that community, you'll be received differently.
Well, you know, it's interesting because to reach and to inform and influence an audience, one needs to reach them where they are. And in a certain sense, that's what you've spoken of. And in some ways, you talk about it within the context of literally reaching them where they are, physical presence. You join an association. You have an open forum at the institution. Someone is in your clinic. But not everyone enters a clinic or a museum or sets foot on a campus or is in an association. But there are opportunities for education, whether it's new media, television, film, the workplace, and of course the internet. So where do you think we will need to build additional presence in order to magnify the effect of being able to influence or at least inform people when they're hearing countervailing things because of these same opportunity sets that exist with new technologies? So how do we, where will we need to build a presence so that the next generation, some of our people in this audience, will be exposed in a meaningful way to the ideas and perspectives where culture meets science, medicine, and technology that will in fact shape their lives, you know? So how can we do a better job of reaching them?
Well, it's an interesting challenge, I think, in the day, because it's not just a question of our own society, where a lot of people watch television shows where the norm is people shouting at each other, and that's considered entertainment, and that's considered to be informational exchange when it's not. The question is, how do you engage people in meaningful dialogue? And I think about that a lot at the Smithsonian. Part of our job is, if we have a topic that is somewhat sensitive or controversial, is we don't want to simply engage the group of people who already believe in that topic.
Yes.
We want to engage the people who don't necessarily follow that point of view, but would benefit by broadening their mind. One of the most meaningful examples to me was a little anecdote. When I was at Georgia Tech, we had, at graduation, we had students, a select group of students, speak to us, and their job was to take 1 minute to say the most meaningful thing that they had experienced at Georgia Tech. That couldn't be about a parking ticket. It had to be about something. And so one student stood up, he said, when I came here, I was from a small town in the South, and Georgia Tech assigned me to a dorm room, and I walked into my dorm room, and my roommate was already there, but was out, and I looked in the closet, and he said, I saw dresses in there, and I saw bags of rice, and I looked at the guy's name, and there were a bunch of consonants, and it was like this long, and I went down to the end of the hall, and I said, I can't room with this guy. And they said, give it a try. And he says, 4 years later, Sam and I and our families are the best friends forever. And that's an example of someone coming in and seeing something and reacting to it, but giving it a little time and then having that wonderful growth experience that you can have. And I think universities are particularly good at that if you construct that dialogue correctly and not let people become isolated.
You know, you deal with healthcare policy. You deal with building and in many ways creating infrastructure. You deal with stewardship of an institution that's already about 165 years old, but you intend to be around for at least the next 165 or 200 or 500. But so many decisions in the end reach not just a few years into the future, but decades into the future. And so some choices that are made today will influence the lives of our students for decades. So what tools do you use to look into the future? But importantly, how do you get people to make decisions today and provide support for initiatives or choices whose effects will play out more or as much into the future as into today? Because there's a lot of focus on the here and now. But a lot of what will define what we will become as a nation and what we will be as a global society has to do with decisions today, but where I may not see that effect. So how do we help people in that regard?
Well, I get a unique perspective at the Smithsonian because I get to see the history of our country up close and personal. Right now, for example, we're preparing for an exhibition on the Jefferson Bible. And Thomas Jefferson, in the latter part of his life, wanted to do two important things. He realized that the educational system wasn't set up for the Republic as it was and would be. And so he created the Bible. He created the University of Virginia. That's on his tombstone. He wanted that to be on his tombstone. And he made the Jefferson Bible, which you can acquire at Amazon, not the one we have, but you can get one. And he cut out what he believed the Bible, he wanted out of the Bible were the moral lessons that he thought were very important, that would stand the test of time, because they had stood the test of time, because they came from the ancient knowledge. And so he cut out precisely these moral lessons in 4 languages, and he made a Bible. And he bound it in a very unique way, and so today it turns out that we have both the source Bibles, where he used this razor blade, and this Bible. And he bound it so tightly the pages have broken now. And so right now, we have that Bible unbound. And I can see Thomas Jefferson's notes in the margins that he made that you wouldn't ordinarily see. And that's so inordinately profound. And the fact that he was thinking this way, and I think oftentimes if we can go back to the founding principles of things, it helps us get past the disputes of today. And the Jefferson Bible is they used to give it incidentally as a gift to every entering member of Congress up until the 1960s. And I'm all for doing it again.
Sam, what about in your business?
Thank you.
Well, my business is long-term.
I know.
I've been at this almost 50 years. I can go back and look at the buildings that I built that long ago, and they're still there. Nobody's torn any of them down yet. They've gone through any number of iterations, from what they were originally intended for. Others of them, I have one building, I have the same tenant that's been in there for almost 40 years. But what you do in my business is that you're building, you mentioned building for the future. I build for the future, and it's long term. It isn't for tomorrow morning, it's for a long time. And you have to think about that, because what you're doing is you're really building an environment that is going to influence people for a long, long period of time. Some of what's built is terrible. In a word, it's terrible. And fortunately, we're tearing down an awful lot of what has been determined to be terrible and found out to be terrible, and it should never have been built in the first place. But also, a lot of what is old is pretty good. And it's good for probably about the same reasons, because it gives people an environment in which they feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. And that's really what it's all about. Whether you're working, living, playing, no matter what you're doing, your environment, your surroundings, this edifice, all convey a message, but it's to you personally. What you feel what the surroundings tell you. So it's important that as structures are designed, as structures are built, that they think about how long the structure is going to be around, how many people it's going to influence, what is it today, but what could it be tomorrow? And all of that kind of plays into the whole development process, that as it goes on and as you begin to think about where is the end point, there really isn't an end. There really isn't an end, because these things, they do it best in Europe, as most of you know. Structures there have been up for 500 years. They're still useful structures. People love to live in them. If they didn't like them, they would have torn them down a long time ago. So there's a way to build, there's a way to engage, there's a way to think about the future that creates an environment that people are comfortable with for a long, long time.
I'd echo on that, and I'd go back to my first statement is prevention, and that if we prevent people from getting sick, put things in place, build environments where people are healthy. the University of Miami School of Architect, for example, showed us that older retirement communities where if there's a cul-de-sac or a community where the older people had front porches, they tend to stay in their homes active longer just by building front porches. Exactly. Simple things and they're called built communities, and you build these communities for health. If we will go back to just saying in the future we can see those outcomes down the line, we can see that preventing you from getting diabetes or preventing you from getting hypertension and strokes, that down the line will make a big difference in our overall health. We may not be able to see it today, but we can see it 2 years from now, we can see it 1 generation from now, and that I think is sustainable.
So in your case, you're really talking about building healthy communities, getting people to make healthy decisions, which literally play into longevity and better lives. Yeah. Then you talk about, in a way, codification of great ideas to have them propagate into the future. And you talk about literally building things that last but have enough inherently built into them to create flexibility to propagate forward in time. Wayne, you were going to say something.
Well, it's interesting, I think we were kind of converging on a thought, and that is this idea of thinking in the long term. And
absolutely.
Thinking about well-being, thinking about livability, and all these things in the long term. And I give a little talk from the Smithsonian point of view of extinctions, and I note that the Smithsonian has species that no longer exist, skeletons and remains and so forth of these species that have no longer exist. And one of the most poignant is Martha the passenger pigeon. She lived to be 29. She died in the Cincinnati Zoo, and they gave her to the Smithsonian. And you know the story of the passenger pigeons. They were once so numerous, they blackened the sky, and yet they were clustering birds, and they were clustering trees, and people could just kill them with apparently sticks. And people thought they would last forever. So I go down the list of the species that have gone extinct and will go extinct. The great tigers, there are only 3,000 of them left in the wild, so we're working to try to save them with the World Bank and so forth. And then I sort of end and say, oh, by the way, the largest collection of remains that we have of extinct species are humans. Because we have all human species now, something like 200 of them that existed, and they all went extinct. And Homo sapiens is the only one left because the species degraded the environment where they lived, and then when change came, climate change, they couldn't adapt. Neanderthals were for cold weather. Right. They couldn't adapt to warm weather. You know, Homo erectus was designed for warm weather, couldn't adapt to cold weather. And so you degrade, and I think there's a lesson there for all of us, and that we all need to work to save our environment. It is such a precious thing on this earth, and I hope we're working on that.
But you know, and this is not for discussion, but you know, roaches stay around a long time.
They do.
Longer than everybody.
You know, you mentioned that you ask about how do we communicate with people, and I don't have an answer, I have a question mainly, and that is, in this role, I have a national platform. I have a microphone, and I can talk to people. We can launch national campaigns on particular issues like HIV/AIDS, or one of the things we're doing is medication adherence, that we know that 75% of Americans don't always take their medications as directed, trying to teach people how to take their medications. We can do those sort of things, but how do we really reach people? My predecessors would be able to stand on TV and make a speech and everyone would listen. You stand on TV now and make a speech, they're on every cable network looking at something else. I mean, you have so much competing, and there are all these talking heads that are expert doctors all over the TV, so it's not gonna be the same. We can try the internet, we can try the Twitter and the new things, but there's so much out there competing. I have that question, is how do we reach people? And because healthcare is so personal, it's a one-on-one thing, even it's just one of those things that you have to get to the individual to make them want to be involved. I'm not really sure how we're going to be able to do that in the years to come.
That's very. I think I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience. I would ask that the lights come up a little, since it would be easier to see. I would ask you to please move to the microphones in the aisles. And I will remind you that we are recording this, so it is essential that you do use the microphones. Now, if you prefer, if you're shy, you can tweet your question, using ampersand, not ampersand, the
Tag.
Right.
Hash
The hash sign,
sign.
thank you, right. RPI colloquy. So is there a question that someone would like to raise? Please, John.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for a great discussion, very timely discussion, very good discussion. My question will be for Secretary Clough. But first, I found President Jackson's comments about change and the fact that, I'll paraphrase, change is good, but changing for the sake of change or changing everything is a very dangerous situation. Having worked for a high-tech company of 100 years old this year, IBM, I find that that is a very profound observation. The high-tech field is littered with companies who did not change, but it's also littered with companies who changed everything and lost their sense of who they are and where the future is. Wayne, in your experience in higher education, what would you say are the things that need to change the most in education in the United States, and what do we have to be careful not to change so that we don't lose our way going forward?
Good question. Good question. I think there are these very large issues that we have to be concerned about in this country. Go back to Thomas Jefferson. That was the emergence of universal education for K through 12, and then the creation of universities that would serve the larger public here in the United States to help this country. And if we lose that, the one thing we do have in this country when we worry about global competitiveness, we know our universities are still the best in the world, and I don't say that just because I was president of one. We know that.
Or you're in the one that's really the greatest.
Well,
okay.
That's good.
Touche. We know because feet tell us that. International students have choices. They have 2,000 universities they could choose from, but they still come here. So protecting that wonderful asset is, I think, something we need to be concerned about. And making it available to people who are losing their economic ability to go to those universities. And so I think we have to, today, for example, I think to give one big kudo to the Obama administration, they really put an emphasis on Pell Grants. And we need to do that. So I think making sure there's access. Having met, I came from a family of very modest means. And the fact I was able to go to a school like Georgia Tech and then to Berkeley made all the difference in my life. And I hope I've contributed something to my country and given back. And I think that ethic has to prevail if we're going to succeed. And so I worry that we are losing that as we're slashing budgets left and right, that we're not thinking through carefully how we maintain that balance and give access. And the country is getting ever more diverse. And how do we represent that diversity in our universities? The Smithsonian has to think through this equation. How do we speak for a growingly diverse nation? What is the glue that holds our country together? So I think there are these multiple kinds of questions. To me, it comes back to the core is the values. Go back to the basic values that you have. And those basic values should drive change if there's going to be change. But the values, you stick with those basic values.
Thank you. Please.
Question for Dr. Benjamin. I'm Ted Rosenkrantz. I'm a professor of pediatrics and obstetrics at the University of Connecticut. I'm a neonatologist. I take care of many sick newborns, a lot of premature newborns. My dean tells me that I do God's work. Unfortunately, the Lord has not been paying the bills as well in Connecticut. Over 50% of our patients are covered by Medicaid, which in Connecticut means getting 10 cents on the dollar. And I don't think many people would get their car repaired if they only paid 10 cents on the dollar. And I guess I'd like to know when the focus of our country is going to be on our country's children so they get the care, so they are healthy and they can take advantage of great educational opportunities.
Actually, that's what we've been trying to do, is focus on, particularly on children, including the Let's Move program with the First Lady, and trying to make sure that we fight childhood obesity and eliminate it in one generation. A number of the programs that within the Affordable Care Act is focusing on the fact that we need to engage and put a lot of emphasis on primary care specialties, particularly the medical home model from the Academy of Pediatrics has been very involved and at the table. We also know that you need to keep your doors open to be able to see patients. So a lot of that discussion is going around. It's at the basis of what we're doing, exactly what you're saying. Thank you for what you do.
You know, I'm not a doctor, but PCAST has been thinking about this. And I think there are questions about healthcare delivery and where costs are in that arena. I'm sure all of us have had the experience of going to doctor's offices, sometimes within the same medical group, and then going to another doctor and having to fill out the same information repetitively. Yeah. So things like electronic health records, things like digital information that can be shared to help and speed diagnoses, new ways of providing community-based health, maybe the minute clinics or something where not everybody's trying to go to an emergency room or, you know, to a specialist. So all of these things are things that we have to be able to step back and think and talk about in a coherent way. Let's hear a question from here.
My question's for Mr. Heffner. Sam, you have a great perspective and a very unique perspective that we don't have, of being able to see Rensselaer 30 or 40 years ago and Rensselaer today. Can you do a favor for us and dream with us and tell us where you'd see your Rensselaer 30 or 40 years from now, and what would you be proud of? Where do you see it going?
Well, first let me say that, you know, Rensselaer today probably doesn't resemble the Rensselaer of 30 years ago in more than maybe 10 to 15%. If you looked at it on balance, since Dr. Jackson came, this university has changed dramatically. I think the real answer to the question is, if we could convince Dr. Jackson to stay another 30 years.
I need a little help from those in biotechnology, I think.
This is one of those things where the sky is the limit, and there would be no way to dream that large. But having seen what's happened here, I think that this university has just transformed, and I am convinced. First of all, I'm extraordinarily proud of it, and I think I can safely say that in the next 30 years, there isn't anybody in this room that can really imagine that far ahead accurately, because 11 years ago, there was nobody in this room that could have imagined where we would be from then to today.
Thanks. Please.
This is the Dr. Benjamin line. My name's Liz Saxby, and I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I've been involved in healthcare and the insurance industry for about 12 years. I've owned my own company. I've worked for other companies. I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and I know you have seen your share. My question is, I'm primarily involved in Medicare programs right now, Medicare Advantage plans, and there are some out there that have no co-payment for insulin, for example, that really work well in preventing diabetes issues, diabetic issues. They save money for the company. They help the lifestyle of individuals. So there are programs out there that really can work. And I'm just wondering why Medicare is not really looked at as a platform for the rest of the healthcare that we need in this country for all ages. I mean, it is a nice platform.
It is, but CMS, who runs Medicaid care and Medicaid from the national level, really have been engaging industry, insurance companies and all to start to look at that. And when we talk about putting all of health care into one system, Medicare, everyone doesn't want to do that. It's sort of, how do we get people covered? How do we get the things that are needed, the basic things covered, the basic primary care issues, the basic medical package covered? Now, how you deliver it is a matter of question. Some people like their private insurance, and they should be able to go and get that coverage from their private insurance. Some like Medicare. There's some state Medicaid programs who really provide good services. They may not pay very well, but they have good services provided. So having all of those things available is what we've been looking at. I'm trying to make sure that we get everyone have access to care, everyone have coverage, and that's where we're moving. These new, in the Affordable Care Act in 2014, everyone should have coverage. The states have the ability to set up their own plans, should they want to, and we're going through a phase right now that some states want to and some don't, but we're giving them that opportunity to do that. But you're right, Medicare is a good model.
I just thought that might be something that would be a choice that could be put together as a choice for people, say even 50 and up or 40 and up, you know, just to take a chunk at a time, to take a concept that was discussed earlier.
That will be one of the options, and that is the option that those states who don't choose have their own, it will be one of theirs.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
We'll take a question here, and then we'll insert in the middle a tweet question, please.
Sam, you've served as a trustee here for 33 years, and you've led the Board of Trustees for 15 years, and this is during a period of change. We're looking up here at the architecture of change. Tremendous change here at Rensselaer in this last 15 years. It's hard to believe how it's changed. Could you select or pick a time, an action, an event that had the most impact on this change?
We hired Shirley. No, seriously, Bob, it really, I would say that the event that really triggered what's happened at Rensselaer was the board meeting where the board really made up its mind that we had to change Rensselaer. And it kind of followed from there. And I think at that meeting, we literally made up our minds that we would do what it took to make it happen. Because theretofore, I mean, you know, talk is cheap, and theretofore we had talked around what we thought should happen. You were there for most of it. And we finally got to the point where we just said, it's got to happen, and we will see that it happens. And then fortunately, we found Dr. Jackson. And it wasn't easy in the beginning, as you all know. As many of you in the audience know, it wasn't easy. Because we were bringing change. And we brought a lot of change. But the board stood fast. The board had made up its mind. It had chosen its leader. And we stood fast. And what you see here today on this campus, in all facets of this campus, not only this building and the buildings, but the underpinnings, the organization, the management, the whole structure of this university changed because the Board of Trustees made up its mind at one point that it had to change.
This is a question that came in through Twitter. You know, we've talked about improving health care, improving the educational system, but of course people today are very focused on job creation. And so the question is, can you comment a bit, and maybe we can all be succinct, about connecting the dots between improving healthcare, improving the education system, and creating new domestic jobs?
Well, I'll just say having a healthy workforce is really important. So if we can have a healthy workforce, and I'll let the rest of it.
Great. Wayne?
Well, I think it certainly comes back to opportunity, that everyone has to feel that they have a chance. And obviously right now, the economy is not generating the jobs that we need. But I don't think we've done our job in this country in terms of thinking through how we live in this new world that we're in, where China has, for example, more English-speaking engineers than we do, where they have far more smart people just because they're a bigger country and they're very bright, talented people. And so our debate seems to be about sanctions on countries, these kinds of narrow approaches, as opposed to thinking about how will we compete as a country when we aren't the biggest economy in the world? That day will come. How will we compete in a world where it's totally interconnected and where there are lots of smart people doing innovative things and they have educational systems as good as ours? And I don't think we've thought that through. But it's certainly, you have to have good health care, you have to have good education, you have to have good places for people to live. Otherwise, it doesn't work at all.
Sam?
Well, I concur with that wholeheartedly. I think that really the environment that you create, and that covers the gamut of the social environment, the built environment, the governmental environment, to call it that, all have to work together in order to deliver the product that we all know has to come forward. And I think that in the end, it really boils down to the necessity for a much better understanding across the disciplines that each must cooperate with the other in order to compete as we go down the road, because it is going to get an awful lot harder than it's been.
And I would just add to that healthy workforce is that they need to have a healthy mental health. People need to be happy in their jobs and what they're doing as well.
Please.
It's a question from Mr. Heffner. Sam, you graduated 55 years ago from RPI. Around the same time I did. Question. This was before Sputnik, before we landed on the moon. Those were all dreams. Tomorrow we will be graduating 1,700 individuals who will be newly minted with an RPI degree. You've been very successful over the years, very successful architect, successful businessman, entrepreneur, great pilot. What's your advice for success to the newly graduating students tomorrow? What should be their dream and how do they fulfill it?
The first thing is work hard, because somehow the harder you work, the luckier you get. And don't be afraid to dream. Don't be afraid that because you don't know how to do something that you can't do it. You come out of this school, I said this earlier, you come out of this school with an innate ability. There's something that it puts in you that says, I can do it. And whether you know how to do it as an individual is not as important as figuring out how to do it with a collection of individuals. Find the other talent that helps you do your dream. Become a part of it, obviously, but don't be afraid to dream the big dream, because it can happen. And if you work hard, it will happen.
Okay. Please.
Dr. Benjamin, I'd like to go back to the discussion about childhood obesity. And this is a problem that is really structural, and this colloquy is about architecture of change. So we know that in our school systems, they're having to cut back, and that often means cutting out recess, cutting out physical education. When kids go home, they're not playing outside, even in the suburbs where they have plenty of room. And then families are making choices about food that aren't healthy, sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of lack of awareness. So given the healthy workforce that we need and that these problems will propagate health on through the years, talk a little bit more about what you can do from your platform to help the country to realize what a major health problem this is.
Yeah, a lot of those things are addressed in my Surgeon General's Vision for a Healthy and Fit Nation, which is a paper we released, but also in the Let's Move campaign. We've engaged the schools, the industry. We brought together agencies within government. When you talk about schools, for example, Secretary Duncan's very committed to putting physical education back into the schools. And we also want to make sure, as you mentioned, that we want to have recess because kids need to have unstructured play. It's just as important. But then when you go to the cafeteria, that's the USDA. And so the USDA has to improve the school lunches. So having all these people at the table has helped. Having the communities, having industry that's been helping with the soda companies, they've taken the sugar drinks out of schools. That was part of the Let's Move commitment. The Walmart has decided to make some healthy products in their all their stores. So we've got all these people that's starting to come together. When we talk about, we're making grants available. We had during the ARA, or the ARA stand for the Recovery Act funds, were put in place. There was something called this Communities Putting Prevention to Work grants. These were grants given to communities to either do obesity or anti-smoking. And many of them were doing obesity. And so some of these grants were just starting to see what they're doing. For example, there's one community did something called the walking school bus, whereas the parents would pick the kids up at school, walk them to school, pick them up at home, walk them to school, pick them up in the evening, walk together back home in a safe way, and they call it the walking school bus. Communities putting sidewalks in place, putting lighted playgrounds, things that get kids working and playing and outdoors. We have some communities that didn't have healthy foods. They didn't have grocery stores. So one of the things we did was put refrigerated units in the convenience stores. And now you'll see them in some of the groceries, in some of the drugstores. We'll have refrigerated units with fruits and vegetables and some salads and things that are some healthy options. In the schools, we couldn't get the vending machines out because I've been working on that for years, so we decided to put healthy things in the vending machines, just making some changes. But the one thing that we need to make sure that we do is make sure it's fun. That if it's not fun, it's not going to be sustained. So my whole thing is going around doing Surgeon General's walks around the country, making sure people are enjoying themselves. We used to go, telling my age, disco dancing. It wasn't because somebody said do 30 minutes of exercise. It was because you thought you looked good and you're having a good time. But making exercise part of your everyday lives. We did a walk with the Grand Canyon where, I wouldn't call it a walk, it's a hike. It was 26 miles rim to rim and 5,000 feet down and 5,000 feet up. But the point is that you don't have to be an exercise buff to do all these things. Just get outside and enjoy it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. So just having people in the whole community get involved, but especially starting with our children.
Please.
Yes, hello. Hello, panelists, and congratulations on your honorary degrees. My name's Joan Fitzgerald. I'm a proud parent of a biomedical engineering student here at RPI, new graduate. And I'll talk to her, Dr. Jackson, about maybe she could develop something for you. But this question is for Dr. Benjamin. Dr. Benjamin, I've been working in preventive health. I'm a dental hygienist for over 35 years. And I'm now returning to continue my education in healthcare management. And the question I have for you is, when we look at the structure that we have right now in this country, it is a very strong advocacy towards specialized medicine, going into the specialties. And what are you doing to actually increase the motivation of students to go into primary care? And, you know, I know there's some issues with balance and money and finances and certainly getting paid, and your story was very inspirational. But what can we do as a nation to encourage our students to go into primary care?
Thanks. You know, as a family physician, I have to say I'm biased. I think that's where everybody should go into primary care. But we also need our specialists. As a primary care physician, we need someone to refer to. They need to have an understanding of what the primary care expects from them and what they're sending the patient back to. Many of the things in the Affordable Care Act is there to increase the workforce, and much of that workforce incentives is towards primary care. For example, the loan repayments, they have a bias and a direction toward primary care, because once everyone's covered, we really don't have the workforce to handle that. So we have to be preparing. So we're giving loan repayments, scholarships to people to go into health careers. And along that line, I'll just mention that it's very important that we encourage minorities to go into health careers. While 25% of our nation's population is minority, less than 6% of the physicians and nurses are minority. And that's the same percentage as during the Flexner Report of 1910. It hasn't changed. So just a little bit of encouragement might help. But that's really important that we start to make sure that we value primary care, we value the fact that talking to a patient is important, not to minimize the specialists because they are needed as well.
Wayne, here's a tweet for you, and then we'll do these last questions here. In this day and age of the internet, is it not time for an active effort to create a virtual K-12 educational resource for all?
Well, certainly we're heading in that direction to some extent. I think all evidence is that just virtual teaching is not enough. I think face-to-face, we're a species that enjoys face-to-face contact. We learn by interaction. Now, I know you can do that with SharePoint, lots of other ways you can actually overcome those things. But I do think there's a shared experience part that's important for people. The evidence is that MacArthur Foundation's done an awful lot of work in this area, that virtual education can truly help and supplement the K-12 environment and enrich it. And we're doing a lot of that at the Smithsonian. We have these vast collections that we're digitizing because there are wonderful stories behind almost all of these objects, and to put these objects out in very organized ways so that teachers can use them and help them. And most of our exhibitions today, when we do a new exhibition, we're building a digital component on top of it. So the idea is that when we have an exhibition, and next year, for example, we'll have one on the War of 1812, we'll have a digital component with that. And so the physical visitors will be able to see this wonderful thing, but we will develop a virtual component for teachers and students, but we deliver it all over the country. And so everybody will get, in essence, access to that information. And I think there's special things that the Smithsonian can bring that enrich and inspire, that we're good at inspirational work. So I think it works. I think we haven't quite figured out the right balance yet. We'll need to experiment more, but it's coming. There's no question about it. What I've found, for example, I spent some time not long ago on St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait meeting with the Yupik Eskimos. And I met with them talking about climate change, which they're very concerned about. But I also met with their teachers. And they said, we love the web materials we're getting from the Smithsonian. Please keep giving it to us. What you find then is those neighborhoods, particularly that don't have access to universities or cultural institutions, love this kind of material because they simply don't have it. So it really fills a gap for those folks.
I'm going to do my usual technique, a variant of it. We're going to have 2 questions posed, and then we'll have the answers, and then we'll do the final questions. This gentleman, this lady, please.
Dr. Benjamin, your actions have demonstrated a personal dedication to your work that serves as an inspiration in only the way personal sacrifice can, and I really mean that. To what extent do you think an effective leader must struggle alongside their constituents as opposed to pursuing wealth or the proverbial mansion on the hill?
You know, if you do your job really well, the rewards will come. They'll come. And if you follow your heart and your passion, they'll come. I do have to tell you, though, wasn't quite a sacrifice because the patients really took care of me as much as I took care of them, and I think I probably got much more out of it than they got out of me being there. So it's just how you look at it. After Hurricane Katrina, for example, when you're a part of the community, you're just part of it. We had gone through Katrina, and we have 2,500 people, 2,000 lost their homes. We rebuilt our clinic, and we were going to open it up the day after New Year's. We were getting ready to had everything in it, put all the dried out charts back in, and New Year's Eve it burned down. It just burned down. And so that next day, while we were standing there with the embers, one of my patients sent me an envelope by her granddaughter, and in that envelope was $7 to help rebuild the clinic. And I knew I wasn't by myself. He was like, if she can find $7, which she didn't have, we could find the rest. So it really isn't a sacrifice. It was more of I got a lot more out of it.
Shirley, could I add to that real quick?
Please.
One of the things I think our country needs to think about, in 2 weeks I'll be in Haiti, and I've been there already because the Smithsonian is doing a cultural recovery effort. We're trying to rescue their art, which is in the rubble. And I'm an earthquake engineer in another life, so I've been to earthquake zones all over the world, and I've never seen devastation like this. I've never seen lack of recovery from devastation like that. And as I flew back from Haiti, after having seen these incredibly resilient people in terrible conditions, we flew into Miami. And as you flew over Miami, you saw all the wonderful houses, the cars, and you thought, oh my goodness, this country is so advantaged. So somehow I think this country needs to think about that. The equation the young man asked is, what should we be doing as a country to help others? Because I think we build enmity if we don't.
Please.
My comment and question is Dr. Benjamin. First, I work in the wellness industry, and as far as I see, our current program is a more reactive one, where insurance pays for, say, physical therapy after you become sick. The insurance pays. So I like the platform of prevention, but knowing that behavioral change and modification, lifestyle changes is so hard, even though the evidence is there. Right now, the people who kind of get that picture privately pay. So are there any individual incentives being put forth to kind of incent people to make those positive changes, say as insurance reimbursement or lowered rates, or to pay for their gym fee or things like that?
We're seeing quite a bit of that, you know, it's saying moving from that sick model to a wellness and prevention model. And on this Prevention Council, we have a presidential advisory group, and part of that is integrative care. And so we're seeing a lot of the integrative models. The alternative or complementary medicine is part of that. Many of the insurance companies now are seeing the value and starting to pay for fitness trainers and health coaches and gym memberships. They're starting to see the value of it. And I think as we all start to see more of it, it'll become much more commonplace. But that's part of the industry that we're bringing on board to try to find ways to get people to value it. You'd be surprised how many people really get it once you move out of healthcare. In healthcare, we're trained a certain way. We're trained to treat and to keep you alive and to treat that disease that you have, which is very important, so we shouldn't change that. But we're so busy keeping you alive, we don't see the other part. So it's now trying to get that behavioral change that's really hard.
Sort of reminds me of the difference between the job of the Secret Service agent and the job of the policeman. The policeman captures the perpetrator after the fact.
Yeah.
The Secret Service agent has to keep the person alive before the fact. Please.
Another question for Dr. Benjamin.
I'm earning my degree.
I'd like to pick up on the education topic, perhaps. Rising healthcare costs are certainly the topic of the day, but at the same time, we waste a huge amount of money in this country on pseudoscience in the form of alternative medicine. What do you suppose might be done from your position to help educate the public and redirect those funds to workable therapies?
Well, there is some benefit to complementary medicine. We actually have an entire section of NIH for complementary medicine. So there's some that has some science base to it and its value. So you don't want to throw out everything, but there are some who things that really are as not, I guess, for lack of a better word, they just don't work. I mean, you just quackery type things, and they're out there. Our job is to educate people to make sure they have a way to determine which is legitimate and what's not. And we really have to be out there at least promoting that. We've tried to get people to go to certain websites that we know are valid websites. We try to promote those. We have some within HHS. We have the NIH has some websites. Many of the medical schools and academic health centers have very good sites to go to. We have Medline that we, as physicians can direct patients to go through. So it's important that we understand that there is so much information out there that it's all not valid, and that as clinicians that we talk to our patients one-on-one to let them know what is legitimate, and that's very important.
Yes, thank you. My congratulations to you all. And after the fact, this indeed was the Dr. Benjamin line. But Dr. Benjamin, my question isn't for you. Wayne, my question is for you.
Sure.
You and I have spent a lot of time together on a number of very interesting topics. One that I would like to hear you talk about, especially in the context of Architect for Change and Action to Impact, is the topic of innovation in this country. Mm-hmm. And the fact that for us to actually do anything that we're aspiring to or talking about here today, we have got to ensure that the future is better than the past, mm-hmm. and that the American dream lives on. Mm-hmm. And at the core of that is innovation. Mm-hmm. And most of you who might not know, Dr. Clough and I had the pleasure of writing the National Innovation Initiative for the Council on Competitiveness. Now what, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Wayne? Right. Did you remember anything I taught you?
Working on it. Nick, it's great to see you again. One of the interesting things about that report, which comes back to some of the earlier comments that we've made, is that when we looked at the downloads of it, far more downloads were made overseas than were made here. That was discouraging. Obviously, the other folks have read that and think that's very interesting information, useful information. Yeah, well, I really think it comes down to, the question was asked earlier, what should we do about our K through 12 systems? And I think we've got to energize our students to want to learn. We've got to do a lot more to engage them in learning. Something that I've enjoyed at the Smithsonian is this idea of learning by doing. I think students really enjoy learning by doing. And so getting them out of the classroom, getting them out to make measurements in the field on forest, animal ecology, getting them into institutions like IBM where they can see things happening and participate in science contests. The first robotics competition. We can't get enough of that, I believe. And it really stimulates students. You know, some of us were talking about earlier, it's not a question of solving the problem, it's a question of what is the problem. And we've got to get students to think more about what the real problem is. I told the story that one of the things I had fun with when I was a faculty member in geotechnical engineering, I would send the students out on my college campus I was at and say, I want you to go find one building that has cracks in it and tell me about it. Why do you think it cracked? This was early in their course. So they came back in, and as the students started talking about it, they started to realize all buildings are cracked. And it was an enlightening moment for the students, because what did they do? They actually used their eyes to see something, you know? And we tend to dull them up with just the textbook exercises. And I really think we need to rethink how we get young people, both in K through 12. And I do think, incidentally, it's a great thing to teach engineering in high school. And I'm impressed by what's going on at the Boston Science Museum and other places, getting more and more, because kids like to do things eventually after they've learned the basic principles. We've just finished something called Vanished, or we're in the process of doing that. We did that with MIT, your alma mater. It's a game the kids play. The kids love to play games. And it's an unfolding ecological disaster. And so at each week, the students have to learn a new science lesson to go to the next week and find out what's happening and talk to, blog with scientists. Those kind of things I think we really need to do more of.
I think, in fact, you've essentially answered what was a tweet question here. And it basically had to do with what do we have to do to have more scientists and engineers leading our nation. And I think in the end, there's no point in talking about innovation if we don't talk about innovators. And that really means human capital development. Let us hear then from one of our young innovators.
Hi, and congratulations to all of you. My name is Evan Weinberg, and I'm one of the 1,700 that's going to be walking across the stage tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Great. Thank you, everyone. My question is directed at Dr. Benjamin. Now, there's been a lot of talk about support for education and getting more people involved as primary care physicians, getting out there. But my question lies on your experience helping make the policy. Do you think that, I guess, the lack of people with scientific backgrounds being involved in a lot of policy decisions has caused friction against the change that's needed that all three of you have discussed?
You know, it's interesting. As we lost PE in schools, we talked about putting PE back in schools. Many of the schools had health and PE together. So when you took PE out, you took health out. And so many people didn't understand health anymore. They may have a physical ed class. I mean, not a physical ed class. They may have a nutrition class or something like that, but there weren't any health classes. So I think it's important that we get more health classes back in. And that's important in that if we're going to make policy, we need to understand what we're doing. And healthcare can be very complicated, and any of the sciences can be complicated, but getting health back in school is important.
Shirley, could I? Yeah. One quick comment, and I remember a very important meeting we had with Harold Varmus, who was head of NIH at the time, and he pointed out, and I have to throw a kiss to my fellow engineers, that only 2% of the people who worked in the healthcare business, not speaking to physicians, but speaking about all the rest, were engineers. And I do think engineers think of healthcare as a system, and so to also give a little credit to the National Academy of Engineering and the Institute of Medicine. Surprisingly, they rarely ever work together, the two national academies. They have a joint project now to, in fact, look at healthcare as a system, and it looks at all the things that all the questions have asked here about how they fit and how you address them within a systematic approach, understanding the complications of all the different ways to fund it. And it is an amazing effort, and I think it's going to have a tremendous outcome when it's done.
Well, that's good. I'm glad the Academy is learning from the Center for Biotechnology and Interdisciplinary Studies at Rensselaer, because our whole point has been to bring together engineers with the life sciences as well as with the physical and computational sciences, because, you know, there are so many questions that have to be addressed there. And you're absolutely right. The engineers think in a different way than the scientists, who think in a different way across different fields. And therein lies some of our greatest opportunity. We have come to the end of this fascinating discussion. And honorands, I want to thank all of you and each of you for being so generous with your time and for sharing your insights with all of us. And at tomorrow's ceremonies at our commencement, Rensselaer will confer honorary degrees on G. Wayne Clough, on Samuel F. Heffner, Jr., class of 1956, and Regina M. Benjamin. Each of them has shown by example the best of what we hope for in our students and our graduates, namely their leadership, their perseverance, their commitment to the public interest, to making the world, this nation, better. Their wisdom, their passion, and their accomplishments reflect both the Rensselaer tradition of engagement and with cultural, theoretical, and always practical questions, and their answers, which you have heard, to the challenge, why not change the world? Thank you very much. Please join the reception that's in Evelyn's Cafe.